Dapple? Hello y'all and welcome back to my channel. And welcome to another installment in the makeup series top 10. Today we are going to be talking about probably one of the most painful ones for me to do, which is the top 10 favorite limited edition palettes. Now, what makes this painful is, as the name would suggest, limited edition means they no longer exist unless you want to pay an exorbitant amount of money on Poshmark, Mercari, eBay, and then freaking worry about the fact that you've bought a 5-year-old palette off of a secondhand seller and you're like, this is how we get infections. So, I'm just going to talk about palettes that I have used, and in my experience and in my existence within the beauty community, which, y'all, I've been buying makeup for a long time. So it's time to go through and discuss what my favorite limited edition palettes are. The first one will no doubt come as no surprise to especially those of you who have been with me in my channel since the beginning, the Kat Von D Mi Vida Loca Remix palette. This palette right here, in all honesty, this is the James Charles palette before the James Charles palette existed. No tea, no shade, honey, but it's a brights palette with neutrals in it, which is what your palette is, but the quality of this is and will always be superior to that palette. This was the colorful palette to end all colorful palettes. This was Kat Von D peak performance. It could just be me being sentimental, but I actually wore the neutrals on my wedding day, and this was always my go-to palette for creating my, at the time, signature Visual K looks. And this shade, Noble and Strutter, were the perfect definition and contouring shades for that nose area. Honestly, I don't think the beauty world will ever forgive Kat Von D for making this limited edition, for her not reformatting it and making it a permanent palette, because this, I feel, within the community for a long time, within eyeshadow palette declutters, within collections, within makeup I regret not buying, this has consistently been the one that got away. I have reached the point where I honestly probably shouldn't use this anymore, just because the shadows are so old, but this was my, this and the Urban Decay Electric palettes were my real, just start and push and shove into the creativity that has evolved into my current aesthetic. The packaging was big, the packaging is bulky and whateverness, but this is probably my top number one limited edition palette. Then as we continue strolling down Sentimental Alley, this was hard because I had to pick one. And if we're talking about, my favorite limited edition palettes on a whole, the Urban Decay Vice palettes. I know a lot of people got tired of them, but they were like a kind of a tradition. Me and my friend would always go to the event they held whenever they released a new one, which was basically their holiday palette. But I picked this one. I don't know what name it is. I will insert it somewhere or down below which installment this one is, because after a while they're just like Vice Reloaded, Vice Limited Edition, Vice Z4 7000. But this one in particular, and this one, I believe it's partly, I love the quality. There is that. But part of what makes this one a favorite for me is very, you got sentimental, and then you got looking at this palette, this was when I was doing all shimmer looks all day long. I didn't know nothing about them, crease shade, what's that? I just applied the color wherever the flip I wanted it to be. And I do honestly kind of miss those days where I didn't believe in any makeup rules. I'm like, I'll just do it however the frig I want. And looking at this palette and looking at the shades like Dragon and Alien, I've got a real good dip in Alien, almost hitting Pan and Sonic and Lucky and Freeze. I reached for these so much. And I wish that they would bring back the Vice palettes. This one is just an example. This one is my favorite out of all of them because I just reached for this one so dang much. She is also probably reaching a little too old to use, but man, the memories and the quality and the excitement and the rush of the new edgy Urban Decay releases. And a newer limited edition palette that I definitely think should have been made permanent. The Violet Voss. I love how I'm like, I know exactly what I'm talking about. Then I'm like, what's it called? The Violet Voss Flamingo palette. I have a review on this. If I have reviews or using any of these, I will leave that down below for y'all. But y'all, this palette is so good. I absolutely love the quality. I had tried Violet Voss previously to this and I was like, and then I bought this and reviewed it. So good. I absolutely love the mattes. They're all beautiful. This has only one kind of stupid setting shade, but it's got a little bit of tone to it. The shimmers are stunning. I mean, this was, I feel like it came out and so many people bought it and it's so good. And they should have pulled a, Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance and made it permanent because it's really good. And I feel like brands, unless they're like an edgy brand, not enough of them have permanent colored palettes that color lovers can go back to when we've run out of it, because, we exist too. There are people who love neutrals, but, we need permanent color options, which I honestly think is why the Colourpop monochromatic palettes are so popular, because they're affordable and they're bright, cool colored options that are permanent. I feel like I would be negligent in not talking about one of these, simply because these were such a hallmark. I feel like these and the Vice palettes and the Kat Von D Mi Vida Loca was such a good, can you not? It was like the golden age of, seriously! No! It just represented sort of like the golden age of quality control, the golden age of like consistent but not over excessive beauty releases. We could rely on things like the Lorac Mega Pro, which the first year it came out, it lost it. Everyone was like, woo! This one is the second one, and I bring this one into the mix simply because this is the one that I reach for the most. You've got great construction. You've got 2 rows of, and I just ran my finger into all 3 of those. But you got the 2 rows of mattes and the 2 rows of shimmers, and the quality was so great. And not only that, it's like, okay, we could come to expect. We're like, all right, come holiday, Lorac's gonna release another Mega Pro. And then they did it for 2 years after this, and then people were like, no, we don't like the consistency. Y'all are getting a little too repetitive, and now we're just tossing out releases willy-nilly without any, heed nor care as to when or where they come out. But this, like I said, there's the quality and there's the fact of how much I use it, but then there's also sort of what this palette represents to me, which was a calmer, better era in the beauty community, beauty whateverness. Then I have a palette that I'm double dipping on. This was in my top 10 best permanent palettes, and one of y'all told me that it is actually discontinued. So I'm gonna talk about it again because it's worth that. You probably guess down below. And that's the Colored Rain Vivid Pigments and Shadows palette, which once again, why is this not permanent? Why did you take it off the market? Why is it discontinued? That's rude and you know it. Like, I honestly don't understand. They're like, wow, this palette is doing amazing. Everybody loves it. It's great. It's fantastic. You know what we should do?
I think we should discontinue it.
That sounds like the best direction of action. And they could just be pulling it because, brands like to do the thing where they're like, oh, it's limited edition. And then they pull it and then they bring it back. But this palette is fan-tucking-fastic. If you like bright colors, if you like bright colors that are easy to use, if you like bright colors that are heckin' pigmented, this is it. I cannot recommend this formula and this palette enough. One of the most heckin' pigmented yellows I've ever used. Love the blues, love splash, cruising, the purples, everything about this, I am down. Pretty much colorful perfection in one of its finest forms. All right, another trip down memory lane for some of y'all who have been doing this for a while. This ain't our first rodeo. Well, harken back to the days when Anastasia released 1, maybe 2 palettes a year, and now in 2019, we've released 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But the Anastasia Beverly Hills Shadow Couture World Traveler palette. I honestly miss the days of these. I miss the days when Anastasia would release a palette, as I said, once a year. We would all just like, I mean, the Anastasia releases, partly because they were so sparse. There's that supply and demand where like the demand is there and they're like, okay, we'll supply it once a year. And now they're supplying it and there ain't that demand no more because they oversaturate in the market like nobody's business. But this is such a beautiful, beautiful palette. It's got these deep, gorgeous, rich tones, and I feel like this is a palette that was curated in a time. If this palette, I feel, were to come out now, a lot of people would crap on it. They'd be like, oh my goodness, it's so neutral, it's so boring, it's so just bleh. Where at that time, we hadn't become so oversaturated where we'd seen everything, and it's just this beautiful blue, and this here, the purple, you know, the neutrals are something I can work with. It's such a beautifully simple yet curated palette. This is honestly probably what I'm gonna take to do my mother's makeup on my brother's wedding. It is just absolutely gorgeous, and I wish Anastasia would kind of pull it back a little bit, cool their jets, and be like, okay, maybe we need to go back to simpler times where we don't need to release a palette with every single person every other week. Because the uniqueness had died down, the excitement, the fervor, the intensity of like, oh my goodness, Anastasia is going to release a new palette. What's it going to be this year? Okay, so I wanted to include a Too Faced palette, but Too Faced, while a lot of their products, their palettes are limited edition, doesn't necessarily mean the quality's there. No tea, no shade, I'm just saying it like it is. But one palette that is limited edition, I think, maybe, possibly, they're also real bad at being like, oh, this is limited edition, but then you're like, okay, it's just limited edition from Sephora and Ulta, but you can buy it on like their site. But I'm gonna talk about the Clover palette, which a lot of people crapped on this palette. I totally understand. It's cute, it's kawaii, it's kitschy, but it's a really nice palette. I love the nice softer tones because what I liked about this palette in my review was that it had these like softer neutrally tones and then this green and the purple and the red and the yellow and the blue. But the tones are all done in such a way that they work really well together. The shimmer formula is probably one of the best incarnations of a Too Faced shimmer formula I've ever used. The black sucks. Too Faced does not know how to make a good black, just straight up. But all in all, I feel like this is one of the like least offensive, limited edition, totally random, kitschy palettes that they've done. Because Too Faced likes to release a lot of crap, and sometimes it's hard to shift through the trash to find that hidden gem. I'm gonna ping on Lorac again because I always like to call attention to whenever a brand makes something that's really good and then they're like, well, let's get rid of it. And then you're just like, but why? Especially when it's something that was well received. Now, I'm not sure how well received these were, but these are the Lorac Unzipped Sunset ones. This one is the Mountain Sunset. They also had like Ocean and something else. Now, I do hate the fact that it does this like, I'm like, what is that all about? But, okay. So Lorac is usually a very safe player in the makeup game, and they have their unzipped palettes, which are very popular, and then they released these ones, which is the same format and the same formula, which means beautiful, creamy, pigmented mattes, heckin' pigmented, smooth, and buttery shimmers. And I thought, wow, that's such a great idea to take their, unzipped palettes, which are, more neutral, brown, bronzy, gold type thing, and then have these palettes that have kind of more unique color stories. This one's very cool tone. This is actually the palette that pushed me from being like warm tones are the only thing I'll ever wear. Maybe I'll do a cool tone. And then the one that had the red and the purple, and then, these I feel would have been a great investment to have on the market for the brand, for once again, people who are looking to try a brand but don't necessarily want the norm. Now, obviously, I'm not a marketing whatever person, so I have no idea what goes behind, whether a palette stays on the market or not, other than the fact that I'm not a dummy and saying something's limited edition drives up the sales. But I thought these were just so beautiful. The shimmers were so delicate and gorgeous. You could do just like a gentle wash of the shimmer all over your eye and be done. These were just absolutely gorgeous. I love this green and this shade here. I mean, there is not a shade in this palette that I don't love. Even this brown is just absolutely phenomenal. The fact that they, these aren't a thing anymore makes me very sad because they were just so well curated and were just like kind of like a almost something we didn't have in the market. Then, totally random, people who are familiar with Sugarpill will be like, oh yeah, I know that palette. I remember that shiz. This is the Sparkle Baby palette. Now, if there's one thing that I have heavily wanted to happen is Sugarpill going back to making palettes. They do have some, but 9 times out of 10, they end up being limited edition, except for that one that they just came out with. That one's not. But this was the palette that pastel goth me needed to have. Every single shade in this palette has been used and abused, even though there's a crap ton of product left. I just absolutely love this thing, and I have to stop using it because it's old and the shades are not performing like they used to. But Kitten Parade, Candy Crush, I just this was like in my like kawaii weeaboo anime wanna be a living doll pastel whateverness. This was all I needed in life and all I used. So this, once again, these palettes were coming from like a quality standpoint, but also, kind of what they represented to me at that time. And I do wish, and the aesthetic and everything. I just wish that they would make more beautifully curated palettes like these, like they used to. They had their Heartbreaker palettes. They had a very like cool toned gothy one in this size. I yearn for those simpler, more wonderful times of my youth. Then, last but not least, if we're going to talk about favorite limited edition palettes, I would be negligent not to include the Norvina Pro Pigment palettes. Now, I include all of these because I feel like these, same with the monochromatic palettes from Colourpop, this is a case of the quality is the same across the board. Go in and pick your color scheme. The first one was released and I absolutely fell in love. Then the second one came out and oh boy, my inner 80s child just yes. I mean, all the yes. And then of course my absolute favorite and what I am wearing today, the number 3, which is everything warm toned green, orange loving Soraya needs in a palette. These are all just absolutely beautiful. If you love color, if you want just a good solid palette and these are still available, buy them. I would probably recommend the third the most simply because I feel that it is the most user-friendly in the sense of, although it has, the orange and the greens and the whatever, it's also got some more muted warm tones that can just be make using color a little bit less intense and scary. The matte formula is phenomenal. The shimmer formula is phenomenal. Making these limited edition is the stupidest decision Anastasia has ever done. It wouldn't surprise me too much if they did at some point make these permanent, but I feel like the hue and the cry of how close together they've been released, which is a problem, might maybe keep them from doing that too soon, but I do think they are just absolutely stunning palettes, and for being limited edition, that is one thing that I love about Anastasia. Their limited edition products don't suffer from lack of quality control. They still tend to be the exact same formula as something you would get permanently, and these are no exception. They are just so good. But that was my top 10/12 favorite limited edition palettes. Definitely let me know what you think about the palettes I talked about, as well as a palette that, is your favorite limited edition. What palette is your end-all be-all that is just gone and rode off into the sunset in makeup history? But thank you guys so much for watching. I love you, and as always, keep it real. Mwah!